This video is rated PG, for please go ask your parents before watching this. Viewer discretion is advised. School. The education system. If you live in the developed world, there's a likelihood you've heard of this multi-million-dollar industry, and have been influenced by it in some way. If you're watching this video, their chances are you've been to one, or hey, you might even be sitting in one right now. Well, today we're going to be asking some of the hard questions about school. Of course, not when will I ever use this in real life, or when's lunch, but the tough, hard questions that are like eggs made out of titanium. They look easy to crack open, so you can enjoy the gooey, kindery surprise goodness inside. But in reality, it's a gargantuan question to undertake. Our scrambled question is, does schooling influence one's social mobility? The short answer would be, duh, yeah. But that would make for a sucky explanation, so my instincts tell me to give you a wider example. Logically, it's the standard for people to go to school, especially in first world countries. Therefore, collectively, education systems are good. But of course, everything always has to be far more complicated than that. But, in order to ensure that we understand, we should first define these terms. Schooling and education are standardized in Australia, so when we say school, we mean children and youth entering into either public or private schools, adhering to these curriculum formulas. You know, school. The more tricky definition is that of social mobility. Also referred to as intergenerational mobility and climbing the social ladder, social mobility allows a family, person, household, or other bunch of people to move between their social status in society. It's a change that usually denotes a change between their social strata in society, and not the kind made on social media. Because that's a lot of sociology, or just soc, words to be saying, here's an example in true Aussie fashion. Let's look at the footy ladder. And, to give you the example, I'm going to invite Professor Gubenheimer to explain it. Now, because each group trains hard each year and constantly have to earn their spot on the ladder, this is both a good and bad example of social mobility. It demonstrates how fickle it can be. What with financial misuse, debt, and several other things, as well as how hard a person must work in order to climb the ranks and ascend to being top dog, as the hip ones call it. Social mobility is a lot like football, in the sense that there's a lot of factors involved when playing the game, and like football, there's a lot of different types. The AFL, the big leagues of social mobility, is absolute social mobility, noting the possibility of a person's social position changing vastly from that of their parents. Then there's European football, or soccer as we call it, which is open stratification, where some value is given to achieved statuses in society. You know, you got your first car, congratulations, you are moving up in the world. And then, of course, finally, there's our favorite type of football, beach football, when there's a difference in probability or the chances of people attaining certain outcomes, irrespective of structural changes. Social mobility is usually quantifiable, though it's often a monetary thing, you know, through economic mobility, i.e. the changes in one's wealth and their occupational changes. Now, because we're cool like the Beach Boys, we focus primarily on the probability aspect of social mobility, how probability influences your chances. Thank you very much. And now I will hand back to Gerald to continue the discussion. Now, that raises a lot of different kinds of questions. First, how much does school get influenced by social standing? I mean, it's obviously cyclical, right? School influences social mobility, and then social mobility influences one's schooling. Overall, a study conducted recently by Gary Marks called Education, Social Background and Cognitive Ability about Behavioral Genetics suggested that over 50% of school academic performances was predetermined by genes. So more than half of your numeracy and literacy abilities are waiting to be exacted when you're in gestation. That potential is already preset for the rest of your life, in all of half of your abilities. School and other similar environmental factors only reach the influence of one's social status to be about 30%, perhaps even less. This shows in NAPLAN tests, though only marginally, as you can see here. But here's where it gets crazy, because as you might have guessed, Australia aren't the only country in the world that cares about education. What with our current geopolitical climate, that might be hard to believe some days. But a similar American study found specifically that low socioeconomically classified youths were slightly lower on those of higher positioning. Now, if we were to examine this in terms of factors in a purely speculative way, we could throw out a variety of factors that suggest why this might be the case in America, but not in Australia or other European countries. It can, of course, be contributed to external stimuli and factors. A big component being healthiness or lack of it, with America's healthcare system being over double the percentage of people in Australia who are not seeking medical aid. Not only that, studies of the Australian variant suggest these unhealthy people aren't refusing treatment due to inaccessibility or lack of health care, while in America 1 in 5 poor aren't seeking aid, while the scale for the more cash-handy has it lowered to 1 in 20. Additionally, in terms of things affected by money, we should mention that poverty in America is over double that of Australia's after-tax redistribution, which bodes negatively for America, as poverty has been known to directly associate with one's brain structure, with the less wealthy generating a smaller brain surface area, which influences parts of the brain that are commonly associated with language and some cognitive functions. This can be due to another variety of factors, including a lack of nutrition, unhealthy sleeping patterns, low medical treatment, and a plethora of other factors. So, while genes do take up a large portion of the plate when it comes to academic success, and a person's social status can influence that success if you live in America anyway, then what other effects can marketing a person's self-worth by grades have? A big one we see in countries with high PISA scores, the scores that mean that they are the best and brightest schools over 15-year-old ranges, are high suicide rates in young adults and youth. It's been surmised that the pressure to succeed in these kinds of environments is detrimental to a youth's mental health, and thus leads to negative effects. This is a particular concern in China, where a new app has been introduced which sends parents notifications every time concerning imagery appears on their child's phone. I don't know how this would fly well in countries like our own, seeing as most of the people I know use gun emojis and dark meanings on a day-to-day basis, even with simple things like doing the laundry. However, with mental health being the highest killer of youth in Australia, higher than road accidents and other somewhat avoidable tragedies, 12.5 suicides per 100,000 as opposed to the 9.5 per 100,000 in 2012, while a study revealed earlier this year that 1 in 10 youth self-harm. It's important to take these statistics in our mind. Keeping in mind our previous mention of beach football, it's important to realize that a person doesn't have a lot of social mobility when they're 6 feet under. There's no probability of going up or down the social ladder when you can't even climb it. And even then, these kinds of events can impact largely on the community around those that pass on, furthering the impact on a student's school education. Now, for these issues, there's always the possibility of financing, right? I know what you're thinking, Jared. If these kids are poor, then just give the school some more money. That should help even the odds. Well, just take a look at this. This image shows that more than 50% of the results of the NAPLAN are generated by disadvantaged students, impacting our overall scores as a nation as our youth are unable to align themselves entirely with the rigorous nature of the school system due to educational disadvantage. This indicates a dangerous trend in our own educational paradigm, as schools in disadvantaged regions have a gross income that is 50% higher on average than those that are in the bluer regions, which represents a multitude of non-financial challenges in relation to the schools themselves. The BCEC, or Bank West Curtin Economic Center, report suggests that this is not an entirely economic issue, but it's still one that impacts heavily upon the equal opportunities for youth and may, in turn, have a likelihood of affecting social mobility for these youth, due to schools being unable to utilize their funding to their absolute potential, and youth suffering from disadvantages that other regions may not have. This is also one of the primary reasons for Gonski, but that's a topic that we can discuss in another video. Well, if money's not the answer, and following schools with high PISA scores isn't cutting it either, then what is the answer? The answer may surprise you. We'll be back after this quick word from our sponsor.
The word of the day is ubiquitous, as in the education system's work is ubiquitous.
Thanks, sponsor. Overall, all education systems across the world should be following schools with high PISA scores. Wait, what? Now, that might sound really contrived, considering it's possible to go on ad infinitum about the dangers of a stressful environment, but we're talking more about countries that utilize education in proper, more engaging ways. An example would be through the process of learning at the university I attend now, and some of you are probably seeing this already. During the course of a week, you may have to cover the same material multiple times, be it for one class or many. You read at home, discuss in class, and then implement the information in a presentation of some kind. While repetition doesn't necessarily increase retention, as anyone who's ever done Developmental Psychology 101 will be able to tell you, retention is best gained through salience and repetition, or repeating stuff over and over again in an organized way to help you understand it better. There is a notion that restructuring our educational processes will increase retention and life skills, which are essential for creating adaptability in today's modern age. Taking some notes from Sweden would be a good idea as well, and other more adaptable, considerate regions, as they have developed to ensure a child's learning the lessons being taught. There's no specific date a child must learn a concept by, and though they do have a nationwide curriculum and schools are funded by the government, there's a lot of leeway given to teachers in the methods of how they teach and what they teach to students. Australia recently only began developing a nationwide curriculum within the last several decades, while Sweden has had a national kindergarten curriculum since 1998 with a laissez-faire style of participation, and that's just kindergarten. In Finland, students don't start formal academic training until the age of 7, but they're still welcome to daycares and similar facilities, allowing them to learn by playing, conversing, singing, and a plethora of other basic, non-strenuous activities. They have a mandatory outdoor 15-minute break every hour and are given tasks that are developmental in nature, but difficult to quantify on a test paper. One specific account given by William Doyle, who lectured at the University of Eastern Finland for a semester, suggested that his child was sent into the woods with a map and a compass with other students for gym that day, and was told to find their way back. Exactly the kinds of skills that youth would need in understanding their world and being comfortable within their own capabilities. This goes hand in hand with mindfulness programs, which have recently begun being implemented into Australian schools, which allow for treating the issues of mental illness by person, which we've stated before can have a pretty big negative effect on school, education, and even a person's future. Studies have shown that people of lower socioeconomic status have a higher prevalence of mental disorders, particularly depression, and certain anxiety disorders, which then later impact their socioeconomic status, making it difficult to gain employment, housing, or social support, and thus they continue perpetuating the cycle of inequality. We're not addressing mental illness as a serious issue in schools. Despite the fact that 1 in 5 Australians will suffer from it at some point in their life, 1 in 5 Australian teachers in a Beyond Blue survey believe it is not their responsibility to look for mental illnesses in youth, with another half claiming that they are time short and would not have the capacity for training. Developing a nurturing, participation-oriented environment in our schools would not only alter the paradigm for educational practices and increase equal opportunities for all students, but it has the capacity to lower the constant reproduction of mental illnesses by giving youth something to look forward to, and instilling within them a sense of community and importance. Now, with that in mind, let's look at our own local community and take a look at this website here. Shepparton is currently undergoing an ask-around survey about changing the nature of our schools, whether we should have them as big collective, which would lower the divide between schools and ensure that a more well-rounded, uniform curriculum is enforced, not within all 4 schools, but now in just one singular school. With the information here today, I'd like you to cast your own personal opinion in the survey, whether or not our schools should stay the same, only alter slightly, or they should decide to alter themselves to become a more uniform paradigm that allows all children to have access to the exact same opportunities where they study. And when it comes down to probability, everyone being on the same slate is often the best way to go about it. So to conclude, we need to work to better our overall understanding of why these trends in education occur, with additional research in order to fully grasp the nature of how education affects social mobility for our future generations. We need to attempt to analyze the trends that are negatively impacting on our children's future, and decide whether a cohesive whole to education is necessary, or if our current semi-divided structure is effective enough, both on a grand international scale, as well as within our own local communities. Thank you very much.